be fun on our legs busting through this all day.
Get a good workout.
Yeah. So any of you guys study maps of this area before you came on?
A little bit.
Yeah. So this spot, we have a little narrow window to get into the swamp where it's private over there and private over there. And this path takes you back into beyond the private because the private's alongside the roads, which is kind of typical of a lot of public properties. The harder ground is private and the wet stuff's public. I like this path, and I like paths like this because it just pile drives everybody back there and they ignore the stuff up by the road. One of the very largest bucks I ever shot, I watched out of that parking lot, use a bed right here, right over by them pine trees. You used to be able to see all the way through it, but now it's growing in a little thicker because we're talking 25, 30 years ago. But a lot of the biggest stuff I find is right alongside the roads, adjacent to parking lots. And this is a really narrow section, but there's enough of a gap, like the private starts way over beyond those big trees, but it comes in on an angle up to the path and then follows the path. So a lot of guys just thought this was private. With Onyx, now a lot of people know better, but most people still won't look next to the roads. Now, when you look at a property like this, it gets a little overwhelming for most people because they look at it and they just see this big, vast area and they're like, well, where do I start? And for me, an area like this is really simple. You just follow the edge of the marsh because 99% of all the big buck activity is going to be right on the edge of it. So what we'll do is we won't follow this path. We'll kind of jump into the marsh and follow that edge and look at all the little bedding points and the stuff. And I've hunted this for 30 some years, so I know where everything goes on here. And I think it'll be kind of fun. So let's take a look at this bedding over here and where I set up over here, and then we'll go back across. Any questions?
Did you kill anything else other than that one out of the same kind of?
I've passed a lot of deer out of it, but I haven't killed anything else. I even passed a buck out of there this year. But I only hunt it once a year.
Right. I'm just curious, yeah, it kind of, over the years, it's kind of...
When the last couple of years, people have found a spot too.
That was going to be my question, is if you see people in here.
So there never used to be anybody in those spots like that, but now people are finding those odd spots. So too, good thing to remember here is a lot of this workshop is driven by questions and comments and stuff. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Even if you think they're hard questions, I'm used to it. If you really want to know the answer, there's probably other people thinking the same thing. Just feel free to ask. The conversation between us is usually better than the actual scouting.
If you were going in here, and you said this kind of gets cut off into like a little section of public right here, if you were going into this spot and you heard something get kicked up and run off, would you still sit it?
Yeah. Once I went in there, I'm in there.
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll kick up satellite deer, and this area right here, right in front of us, often has does and smaller bucks bedded in it. Okay. And when I walk in there, often I'll kick a deer through, and it hasn't really affected me to my knowledge. Now, if it runs in there and kicks another deer out, that's quite likely. But if you don't go far enough to kick those deer, you're not far enough to kill that deer that you're after. So you just have to take some chances. Now, obviously, I try not to spook deer, but it ain't the end of the world if you jump a buck and it runs through, or a doe and it runs through the other bucks. A lot of times they just look around like, what happened? And you need to settle down a little bit and not race to your spot, because at first they're going to be pretty alert. But often I think they just sit there like, what happened? And they might stand up and look around and watch, but they just go back to what they're doing. And when the hour or two goes by that they actually get up and come through, they've forgotten about it.
Has there been a particular time of year that this is better than others?
This particular spot seems to be good all year.
Are you hunting this on a southern wind, or what kind of wind?
I just don't want the wind to hit the deer. And in marsh, most of the bedding is not wind specific. Even on points and stuff, exactly where they bed is, but they might move their bed over a little bit and have it work with sound. Sure. Where you get wind specific stuff is in like farm country and hill country where they can sit back and watch something. Well, then they always want the wind from the back when they're watching something. When they're in thick cover, they use noise and you're sloshing through the water and stuff a lot. So these spots here, most of them, not all, but most, the deer bed there all the time when they're in the area. So it's just a matter of, like for me, when I come through an area like this, I'm looking for there ain't big bucks everywhere, especially on any public land, right? So I'll come out and make sure there's a buck around. I might take a walk, look for some rubs or something, maybe hunt an area. If I don't see sign, I won't come back. But if I see sign, well, then I'll hit other bedding areas in the same area, like say high rubs or big tracks, or say I heard about a deer somebody's been seeing or got trail cam pics of, or I glass something. Then I'll concentrate on an area and hunt all the bedding areas down. But you have to hunt where there's a buck. If you just start randomly hunting bedding areas, it's going to be a long season. But if you specifically target animals by finding them either through sign or knowledge, and then hunt those areas where you know there's something good, then it's pretty easy to hunt down a deer. If you know there's a big buck in this area, to hunt them down. So I don't know if you guys watch my videos, you'll notice that at the beginning of the season, I hop around randomly a lot. Well, I'm trying to locate a buck. Then when I find one, I kind of concentrate on the area.
Just checking for sign, just kind of seeing what's out there.
Right, and then I might concentrate on 2 or 3 areas at once, because an area you can't always get in there in the right wind or something like that, but I start narrowing my focus as I go, right? As I get targets.
When you say you're looking for sign, like you got stand on your back and you're going in, like with the intentions to hunt it, and if the sign's there, you will, and if it's not, then you'll keep moving until...
I'll give you an example. I hunt here a lot. There might be a spot a mile back, like the last spot we're going to go to today, where I'm intending on hunting there. I like the spot. It's a good spot. But on my way there, I might just go in here and walk this edge and check certain spots along the way. And in most cases, I don't even end up where I'm going. What I don't do is what everybody else does, is take this path and walk it straight to the spot, carrying my bow like a zombie. I use every opportunity in the woods to scout. So when I'm out here, I'm checking spots on my way, and I'm not going to walk past a spot that's hot. So I'm not going to check a spot if the wind ain't right. I'm going to avoid it. Because once your scent's in there, these deer are very sensitive. They'll, like you see all the deer tracks here, we can walk down this trail, they'll walk right through here in daylight because they're used to us here. You get near their bedding area, they do not tolerate human scent. But that's where you can kill them. So it's a catch-22. So you have to make sure the day you go in is a good one. And a lot of cases, like something like this, I can walk through here and kind of go over here and see if there's a rub line that's open up that goes back there. And if there is, well, okay, then I double back and hunt. But never step foot in there and alert the deer until I'm ready to hunt it, right?
Are you ever on the ground, or are you always setting up in a tree?
I would prefer hunting out of a tree, but I do hunt off the ground when I have to. And in a lot of cases in marsh, you do have to in some scenarios.
Yeah.
Is that more due to movement or just the thickness of the brush that you're in?
The size of the trees in most cases. I get away with hunting in a lot of little trees. Like I'll hunt in a spot like this and hunt out of a tree like this all the time. But I'll have something in the background, another tree or something, and I'll glue myself to the tree and blend in, you know. I would rather be up there than down here, because I'm going to try to shoot through the ground on this without clearing a lane. So I'd rather be in a tree. But in a lot of cases, I do end up on the ground because you have to.
In something like this, how high are you going to go in that tree? Are you only?
It has nothing to do with how high I want to hunt. It's how high I can hunt. So it's dependent on where I have cover.
Yeah.
I'm going to get as high as I can where I still have a good shooting angle where I'm not shooting down into them.
Yep.
You know, you got to have an angle about like this or better, right? But I also want a background. You don't want to be a giant blob up in space, right? So you got to look at where the cover is. So every tree is different. So,
too, I suppose.
yeah, exactly.
You get up there and you're like, you're gonna back down because I can't.
That's exactly right. So you're climbing the tree, kind of deciding where to go based on what you can shoot and get into a position where you can shoot, because you're not going to cut shooting lanes. I mean, there's a deer bed at 75 yards from you. So you're trying to pick the perfect spot. In most cases, we can go to spots where I've hunted, and unless you go in the exact tree and see a little limb nip that was hit me in the back, you won't even know I was there. Or you go where somebody else hunts and they had shooting lanes cut and stuff. Every deer's onto that. Mature bucks do not put up with shooting lanes. They know what that is. I mean, they might come back the next year or 6 months later, but they're not going to come back the next day or two.
Yeah, I've noticed that too, even scouting on the public. You'll get it, it's a real thick area, and then all of a sudden you'll be like, it's a pretty open lane right here, and then you start looking around and sure, yep, there's a stand right there.
Yeah. And generally, you can look around and you can find how the bucks are going around them.
Yeah, they do. The trails skirt right.
Right,
in the thick,
exactly.
Right around it.
Right.
In the marsh here, where they can get pretty far away and it's pretty thick, do you find them, like, is this area a combination of them bedding to the big bucks to monitor human access, or just to be left alone, or a combination thereof?
I think that Now, obviously, I'm not a deer, and I can't answer for a deer. But what I think is that they go to spots where people don't go. So they try to find the spots where nobody walks. So I look at a spot like this marsh, and I'll say, okay, now if I was going to come out here, and all you guys are going to come out here and try and kill me, where would I hide? And that's where I look for the deer. And a lot of times I find them in spots where nobody would look to hunt. I mean, guys that come out here, most of them have climbers on their backs and stuff. They're looking for a tree. They're going to end up in the forest down there. And deer aren't really forest creatures. They're edge creatures. They like thick, nasty cover. And it can be low. They're smaller animals. Their back's down here, you know. So I'm looking for, it can be remote or it can be next to the road. In a lot of cases, the stuff next to the road gets hit less than the remote stuff. Now, the remote stuff, for me to get away from people here, I usually got to go through water quite a ways back because there's a lot of people with that remote mindset. And when you get to the islands out here, when I started hunting out here, nobody ever hunted those islands. Now there's guys on every one of them. They're boating to them. There's some guy in town's outfitting now. He takes a boat full of guys to all the islands. So it gets hard to compete with the remote stuff.
But they're still there. They just move to a different.
Yeah, they'll go to spots where there's no trees, basically. So there's a lot of them that just live in the cattails. I've been in trees where you can get way up and you can kind of see little open areas in the cattails, and you'll see these bucks get up, and it's still right at dark, and they head into a mile of solid cattails, and you're like, they ain't stepping out of those cattails till 2-3 hours after dark. The only way to go after them sometimes is on the ground.
Dan, you said wind specific for bedding. It's not about a bedding area, it's about a specific spot in a bedding area. So you could have like a half-acre bedding area that's going to get used with any wind. It's just going to move by it.
Correct. We're going to look at a finger out here that goes out into the marsh. On the tip of that finger, they bed there on a specific wind, but they're always there.
Right.
They bed out in the cattails when it's a different wind, so that they can hear you approach. But that one, when it has the wind blowing up that finger, and he can look down the finger at approaching danger, he sits there with the wind at the back smelling the cattails.
Look, in this situation, if the wind's blowing this way, do you think he's going to have back to you, or is he still going to look at the wind?
I very rarely ever see a deer not looking downwind when they're bedded. They do, but generally I think it's because they know something's up. Generally, when I see them not looking downwind, they're looking in my direction, which tells me they heard something, saw something. But when I see them bedded, almost always they're looking downwind. Yep. They're smelling behind them. See, people are like eye specific, and that might sound weird, but we think with our eyes. Everything is about vision. Deer think with their nose. Everything is about what they smell. So if you saw something, like you saw a bear creeping up on you, you'd freak out. If a deer saw it, he'd want to go downwind of it and smell it.
He trusts his nose more than that.
Right. Where you're going to trust your eyes. You smell a bear, you're like, is my nose playing tricks on me? Is it mud or... You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Everything about them is about their nose.
I just hear, you go online, that's what I learned from you, and that's how I looked at it. Then you hear other guys say it differently. I'm like,
well, you know what I think? I think a lot of people, some guy will say something that sounds smart and everybody repeats it.
yeah.
So I hear a lot of things online that it goes wildfire, and you're like, that's just not true. I mean, I've seen deer in every scenario, and I've never seen that. I'll see how people will say that they approach bedding areas, wind to back so they can smell if something follows them. I've never seen that in my life, and I've seen a lot of deer go into bedding areas. What I see them is swing down around and smell the bedding area and then go straight in with the wind of the nose when they go into a bedding area, because they want to smell the bedding area, and then they turn around and watch their trail and think about that once. Now, I know a deer's not intelligent, maybe it's instinct or whatever, but it's the perfect scenario. Now, if a coyote cuts their trail and it comes in and following their scent trail, it's on the same trail as their wind. They only have to monitor one trail. And I'll watch them come in from this way and circle all the way around to come in with that wind to the nose, and I watch it over and over again. That's why it's really hard to kill big bucks at bedding areas, because they come in with that wind, and it might not even be where there's a trail. You see what I'm saying? But in the morning, I sit back further to where they're coming from, and I have more luck that way. Not to mention, if they come in a different way and get bedded or whatever, you're stuck in a tree. But in the evening, then I push the bedding areas, push real close.
So I was just watching Hill Country before coming here, and you said usually it's the exit trail that's really well defined because the trail coming back in, it depends on the wind.
Absolutely.
They leave that spot on multiple winds, but they're always going to leave, usually going to the same area.
Right. That's part of the reason the evenings have been much better for me, hunting wise. Any other questions?
I guess bed an area like this, I mean, the fact that, I mean, you know deer are bed here through your years of experience, but let's say you're on a new piece of ground and this doesn't have like defined edge. It's real thick and everything. So I guess you're going to this area because it looks like a bedding area. I guess how do you figure out where you're going to sit? I mean, do you just post up on like a heavy rundown trail, or?
If I haven't been here, I'm probably looking at it on a map. And based on the map, I'd probably end up in the same spot we're going to. But what I would do is, if I was walking out here and I didn't have a map, I'd be looking at the terrain and thinking they're going to be on the edge of that cover somewheres, which I'd be wrong, they're further back, but I'd get out there, I'd find that out, and I'd move back and I'd stage my way through. And I think if I was coming in there for the first time, I'd take some chances and push as far as I can, and if I spook them, I spook them, but at least I learned the area. So I think the biggest mistake guys make is they don't know the area, so they stay a little further back. And all that did is say heads up, and basically slap them on the ass and say, hey, we're after you. You have to make that first hunt count. I think back to all the places I've hunted over and over and over again because they're good spots. And I think back to all the deer I've killed like that. All my biggest bucks came from the first sits. The first time I ever went on a spot, the ones that are truly mature bucks. As soon as you go in there, once they hit that you've been there, even if you're a little too far back or something, they're gone. Then try to kill them. And even if they stay, they get into this unkillable mode where they're checking everything before they move and stuff once they know they're being hunted. It gets to be a whole different animal to hunt. That first time in is your best time, and that's the great thing a mobile hunter has, and especially on public land where these deer have been pounded. I mean, there ain't a 5 or 6 year old deer out here that doesn't have a bullet hole or an arrow sticking in it. I mean, every time I shoot one, there's arrow holes in it. You find projectiles in them. These deer go through hell out here, and they learn some valuable lessons. So they're not going to make too many mistakes. You know, a 2-year-old out here is probably the equivalent of a 5 or 6 year old on somebody's managed ranch. It's hard to kill these things, and you can't make mistakes. You have to do everything right, even if you do it on accident. I mean, there's a lot of people that just bumble into one because they're out here, right? But you can have a lot more success by doing things right. And these things, you have to hit it right the first time, in my opinion. You can get lucky and get them a second time, but when I look at all my really big deer, the top 10, I think there's 1 or 2 where I hunted the tree once before, and it was like the year before, not that same season. These things are onto that. I mean, they're smart animals, smarter than we give them credit for.
You find you have better success early season in these marshes?
Not necessarily. I have, I think my main success for killing animals is rut. My main success in these marshes for trophy animals or mature animals is early season and late season, and I'd say late season is better than early season, except for I'm usually tagged out by late season, so I don't get to hunt it. But late season, they're really patternable real easily. You find them and they're on a food source and they move in daylight well. Well, early season's kind of like that too, but the patterns change so often. They might do one thing one day and then be someplace else the next, and you kind of got to hunt an area down. Where late season, they're really stuck on a pattern. And for me, when you understand the animals, they're easier to kill on those patterns early season and late season than they are rut. Rut is better for the people that don't know what they're doing, that can get lucky. And I don't mean that in a bad way. There's still some skill involved in that. It's just that for me, the mature bucks don't go around chasing does through here in the middle of the day very often. They might make a mistake once or twice during rut and run around during daylight, but most of the time it's the younger bucks, you know, and the guys that get good bucks during rut, it's usually 2 or 3 year olds, me included. The mature bucks I shoot, daylight is usually early season or late season, the biggest stuff I've gotten.
So those mature bucks, even during rut, are they still bedding in the same areas that they've been bedding in all year in the marsh?
No, there's different areas that are specific for time frames.
Okay.
You got more questions?
No, go ahead.
But I guess that's what I don't understand when I've heard you talk about that in those videos. From, all right, this is early season bedding, this is late season bedding, this is rut bedding. I guess, how do you pick that apart?
So when I walk into a bedding area, I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, why is this deer here? I'm gonna look at those beds, I'm gonna say, why is he here? I'm gonna look around, and if this is what the bedding area looks like now, obviously they're not bedding there in winter. Is there a food source nearby? Is it acorns? Acorns are early season, right? Is there crop fields nearby that are like corn and stuff? Maybe they're coming in here later. I'm gonna take a look at all the signs. I'm gonna look at the age of the rubs, stuff like that, and try to make an educated guess. And a lot of times I'm gonna be wrong. And a lot of times you can't tell. And the way I find out is I give it 3 sits on a new spot. I'll sit it once early season, once rut, and once late season. Sometimes it's obvious to me what time frame it is. Sometimes it's not. Like take a bedding area that doesn't look like it's getting a lot of use, but there's rubs all over the place in there. It's probably just before rut. You know, and to me that's gotten pretty obvious over the years. Sometimes you'll see bedding areas that doesn't look like anything's bedded there in a long time. Well, it was early season and all the beds are worn out now, and you can kind of see it's a bedding area, but you can't see no sign. And you kind of got to use logic. You just got to look at the stuff and kind of use your brain and say, well, this is probably going on because of this. And I think a lot of people they're still in that mindset it's a bedding area, and they don't think about those time frames. And it isn't easy. It does take some work.
That's the one thing I noticed, like rut bedding areas are pretty easy to find, or you know it is what it is just because of all the sign that's there. But then you go out and scout in the cattails and there's beds everywhere, but unless you know what you're looking for, you wouldn't think to hunt there, and it's just kind of one of those things where it's
right.
Like, yeah, if I didn't really know what I was doing, I wouldn't even give this a thought, you know. And that's what I think is the hard part, is just looking at sign and being able to decipher if it's good or if this is an area you should actually put time into.
Yeah, and it's a growing thing, and that's what we're looking at here too. Is a lot of this is about getting you guys to open your minds, you know, and think about things a little more than just following what everybody tells you. Some of the stuff I tell you might be wrong, and you got to find that on your own, right? But
you use trail cams at all to kind of, not necessarily in the bedding, but near areas to kind of determine to help you determine if it's a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Rut,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, kind of.
I really like the idea of dropping trail cams and just leaving them for the season and see what happens and what goes on when, and then documenting that. Not just with the bedding, but everything with deer seems patternable to dates. A lot of times we'll have a big buck show up in an area, and you can't locate them again. They just disappear. And the next year on the same trail cam, that buck will show up within a couple days at the same time frame. And trail cams have really taught me that they're really specific to timing on when they move around. But if you look during hunting season and you think about it, 1 week to the next, so many things change with leaf drop, with food sources, with when crops come down, with when acorns drop and stuff. Everything changes so rapidly that 1 week to the next is huge. You know, it doesn't start getting normalized until late season, which is probably why they're so much more patternable in late season.
I noticed with it on at least cameras on private land, certain parcels are only pay to hunt it until a certain time, because you're just wasting time and putting scent in there.
Yeah. Dave's farm, that farm that I hunt down the road here, 70 acres. You can't buy a good buck on there in early season. It ain't till right about mid-October when they start showing up. It's just the way the bedding and the food lays out. I mean, you can have everything you want there for them.
Yeah.
They don't show up till mid-October. The cameras show it and the hunting shows it.
So how would you use them? I know you talked about not putting them in bedding areas, right? Cameras. So how would you got a bedding area here, maybe you got one over there.
So if I know why the deer are bedded, or I know where they're feeding, or I know where they're crossing the road to go into this preserve, I'll drop the camera at the crossing. Okay? And I might not get him every time he comes in and out, but I'll get enough to get a pattern going, right?
He comes out there, if he's early season, he's going to be there, and all of a sudden he's going to drop off. October.
Right. Right. One way I use trail cameras in spots like this is cell cams are a little different. I will get those a little closer to the bedding. I still won't go into bedding, because you go in there, it's really an intrusion.
Yeah.
But I'll on the entrance exit about where I would hunt, I'll put one and just leave it and let the camera tell me when to hunt. And sometimes it almost seems unfair, because you see them go in there in bed in the morning and you know they're there. Well, let's take a look at the bedding area. Yesterday when I got stuck in the parking lot, deer piled out through here and went across the road over there on the other side of the parking lot. But there's beds right here. Every year these deer are here. But if I come in here, this ain't the bucks that are the target bucks. This is usually a doe group. And generally, I didn't want to walk through them, but I can see 2 beds right here, but generally they bed in a circle. And you'll see them each looking in a different direction. But look at how close they are to everybody walking through. And this is where they are every year. Every year you come in here in winter, they're bedded here. One year we did a workshop in this section, and we walked in here, and we were talking just like this, and one of the guys said, "Hey, there's a deer." And we all looked over, and there was one bedded next to us looking at us. It was a little one, but funny, none the same. But I just wanted to point out the beds as we're going, that this is the kind of stuff you got to go through as you're getting out there, and there's always deer here. Usually you don't even see them if you're coming in here to hunt, because they just get up and sneak off as you're coming in. So the private land goes on an angle, like I said. See this canal here, old canal. You can kind of see the indent in the snow. It's about 15, 20 yards past that and follows it out. There was signs. I know there was a sign on one of these trees, but it's down now. But anyways, the bucks are actually bedding on the private here, right where that red brush is in there. And I would kill them by hunting out of that willow tree. I just stand in the crotch. And I usually shoot them as they cross the water right in front of me here.
Is this the 400-pound slab?
Yeah, I shot him here, yeah.
Which tree were you in?
That tree, that willow tree. Sitting in the crotch about this high up. No stand or nothing. Anything that's not blowing towards those bucks. As a matter of fact, there's a few videos, if you watch the videos, where I hunt this and small bucks walk past me and it's on film.
You said they typically cross down this side, or does it...
They usually cross right there, but there's a good crossing over here too.
So I was just thinking about that as far as, they could come out this way. You think, man, if they come this way or that way, do you not care because you think you could stick them before?
Well, I can get them on every trail that comes out of there. I can see from the tree. Right now you can't see them, but they either walk right into there or they come out over here or over here. But everything comes within range of that tree, and that's from scouting and such and figuring that out. And then they stage right up here where all this rubbing's going on. I don't know if you noticed all these rubs. Well, so they all end up over here. They either come from that way or that way, but they all end up right here. And then they stage on and go across the street. So they're actually only on public land for about 50 yards.
Yeah, but if they're bedded out here and they come, obviously the buck you don't want to shoot. Are these deer getting your wind? Are you not concerned about that? If they come on this side and the wind's blowing this way, obviously if you don't want to shoot them, you're going to get your wind.
Yeah, they leave. It doesn't really bother me that much. You don't want them blowing or anything, but most of the time they just leave, and really, most of the time, it's one buck comes out. Yeah, not a lot of deer. It's one deer, and it's either him or it's a different one.
Do they tolerate scent a little bit more just with how close there are houses around here?
Not really. They'll tolerate it on the trail over there. They'll walk across your scent trail on that trail like nothing. They hit your scent trail out here, they freak.
So how's your access typically?
Kind of like we just did.
Right.
I just slide through there. Yeah, you can't really come from this way because right beside you there, that's really deep muck water and you just make a ton of noise. So you kind of got to come through the brush and you kick some deer out of here. Mostly the deer, they'll run across the street, so it's...
Where do they move into in that preserve you said across the street? Is that food over there?
Yeah, there's crops and stuff over there, yeah.
The other guy's question about the wind, I was a little curious on that too. So you're in that tree, the deer are likely going to come on this side, right? Through there?
Not necessarily. Most of them are on this side.
So, again, which wind direction? So would a wind blowing this way be ideal? Or
not at all, because they bed from that red brush right there.
Okay, that red brush there. Okay.
To all the way to over here.
Gotcha.
It used to be really nice, is the neighbor used to plant that little cornfield right here that was about an acre. I kind of liked it when he did that. But he quit doing that. I don't think he ever got a crop out of it.
So during season it's probably growing up right. It's still doing
This right here? Where we're standing is short grass actually.
Through the wetter areas down here.
Oh yeah, that's high as heck, yeah.
I was going to say, when you come in during season, you could probably tell where they're crossing just by
exactly
the fact that it's...
Exactly. There'll be a beat trail. Like you see where the tracks are coming across right here? There'll be a beat trail right there. There'll be another one that follows the canal because they'll come out over there and follow it a lot, right to there. Kind of where you see the deer crossing there. A lot of them come out right where that tall tree is and come straight in. But you get some that get up over in there. I mean, because there's little islands under all those trees and just come straight across. Some of them will come around like this and come up like this trail goes. But a lot of them just cut right across here.
So coming in here, if you maybe when you killed the bigger ones or whenever you've seen nicer deer out of here, do you want that wind going this way or more?
I just want it not to blow on the deer. I don't care if they get past me and smell me.
If they could be bedded here, kind of throughout this, you know, obviously you've got to have, you know.
So west wind is probably good, right?
Yeah.
West or south, southwest.
Do you notice anything as far as them moving at night in relation to the wind coming out of their bed? Obviously bedding with the wind in mind, but when they
no, I think they come out a little bit earlier if they and move a little further if they got the wind to their advantage. But if you're this close to bedding, they're still going to move that distance in daylight. I've never had a deer get up in them beds and not make it this far, unless they spook, unless I spook them somehow.
Can you explain, I heard you mention in one of your videos, you know, a lot of hunters will set up on like a field edge, for example, for a wind that's best for them to hunt, but you actually got to set up for a wind that's best for the deer to hunt. But then I've also heard you mention too that the direction of the wind, it isn't going to affect the way the deer takes to get to the food source.
Right.
So how does, I guess, those two theories tie in?
Okay, that ties more into different terrains.
Okay.
Marsh terrain is different in that they bed pretty much specifically to the cover, right?
Uh-huh.
But if you get into, like, say, hill country and they're bedding on a point, and you got a food plot up top of that point, so you're waiting for that wind to blow up the point to you to sit there. Well, they're not bedding there when that wind blows that direction.
Okay.
So you'd have to, or maybe they're hitting acorns on the public, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to wait till the wind, you know, they're bedding here, and you're not going to hunt here with the wind blowing to them. You have to wait till it's blowing like this or something and hunt this side.
All right.
Or blowing like that and hunt this side, because he's only bedding there when the wind's a certain, you know, direction. That's not as specific to this terrain, but it is specific to farm terrain or hill terrain. In farming areas, a lot of times they bed in those woodlot blocks.
Uh-huh.
And most people think they bed in the middle of them, and sometimes they do if there's like an opening or something or a thick area in the middle. But a lot of cases, the thick area is the edge, and they'll bed on the edge of that block. And they pick the block they're going to bed on because they want the wind blowing up to their back. They want to smell the woodlot and look at the field. So if you hunt that when the wind's blowing to the field, you're walking right into their vision. You know what I mean? There's another example.
Okay.
So you got to think about how they bed and why. So if they're bedding there on the edge of those blocks watching that field, you go walking in there because, you know, the wind's in your favor. Well, their eyes aren't in your favor.
Right.
You can hunt that in the morning potentially, but not in the evening.
Well, you can hunt it. You just have to realize they can see that field. So you have to think about where you're going to set up and how you're going to set up and how you're going to access it without getting seen.
Where they're going to go so that you're a little bit off.
Right.
You know, they're going to move this way.
In this terrain, eyesight has very little to do with it, because most of where they're bedding is in cattails and grass and thickness, you know.
That was going to be my question is, if this is only going to be about knee-high grass, you're not worried about them peeking at you from out there?
When you look at those cattails, when season comes, it's this high.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of times deer will get through some of that stuff before you even spot them. All of a sudden you just see a head stick them and you're like, oh, how did he get there? Because they're a lot shorter than you think they are, and that's a lot higher than it looks. It's all knocked down right now from the snow and stuff. But I mean, if you look at the cattails over there, this is all like that high. I mean, see how high the cattails that are sticking up are?
Yeah.
That's all that high. So I mean, this is kind of fooling your perception. Another thing that's fooling you is when we walk through the stuff we just did, if it wasn't frozen, you'd be sinking to your knees. Even though we're right next to the parking lot, that gets pretty wet.
Okay.
If you have a buck that isn't making it, say, a couple hundred yards, but it's too noisy or you can't get close enough, are you wanting to play that wind and make him, I mean, are you hunting it on days where he feels confident and you can play just enough wind to get him to move a little bit further in a situation where you can't?
Yeah, I'll do that, or I'll take or I'll hunt it when there's a really windy day,
Okay.
and I feel I can get closer,
wet
or it's
or-
raining,
Yep.
pouring, making noise. I'll pick the battle,
Yeah.
per se. So there's a lot of places where I know I just can't get close enough to kill that thing, and I'm just sitting back waiting
Okay.
for the right conditions. Strong wind is great
Yeah.
because they won't see movement because everything's moving around, and they won't hear you. I love windy days for getting close to those hard spots.
Dan, was this the spot where you had the scrape with the 2 bucks?
Yeah.
I was just going to ask that. Okay.
Where was that?
The scrape was right up in here. I think it was this tree right here.
Coming from
Yeah.
there?
Mm-hmm.
So
Does this spot kind of peter out once the crops are off, or there's no more ag around the area? Are they still gonna bed in here?
This gets bedded pretty much all year, as you can see by the tracks. It's kind of hit or miss. Sometimes they're here, sometimes they're not. Obviously, this is getting pressure now, though, and it's made an impact on larger animals. The guy who owns the land up here does a drive here every gun season, too, where he lines up, I mean, it's like half the town. And they line up on the road out here, and they push this whole thing. And that's made a huge impact on this, too, because the deer don't feel safe. But if you look, you can see a hole cutting in that tree. Somebody made a set up there. Somebody set up in my exact tree. I mean, I could tell somebody was in it, you know. So that stuff all has an impact.
If you hunt a spot and that buck isn't there, are you thinking that either he is in a different area, or will you hunt it a second day knowing that, hey, he wasn't there, he probably didn't catch my scent, and he may come in?
I know people who have had pretty good success doing like 2 days in a row hunts. But for me, I've never had success doing that, so I don't really push it.
Camera where you know he should be moving through there at that time of the year.
For me, I think if that deer's here, if he's bedding out here, and I come in here and hunt, and he goes out a different way, or he's not there that day and he comes back the next day, he's going to smell that I was here and not want to be here again. Right, he's going to be in here sometime during the night and know that I was here. And for me, if you look at an area like this, now think about it like this. When I came in here hunting, I found massive amounts of bedding areas years ago, right? And most of those are still in play. And you locate all these bedding areas, and you find out over the years that really, out of the maybe 1,000 different bedding areas I know of in this swamp, maybe 100 of them have held trophy bucks that I've noticed. And out of those, there's about 10 that I routinely shoot big bucks out of, or see big bucks out of. The big bucks get the best bedding areas, and there's certain bedding areas that'll have big bucks, and certain ones that every time you sit there, all that ever comes out the biggest is a 2-year-old.
Now in marsh like this, the best bedding area is going to be the best spot, with a little bit enough food around it during the day if it wants to browse a little bit, the wind doing the right thing for them, visual, even though it's not a visual place.
Yeah, you know, I don't know why they're choosing a spot. I have to think it has to do with pressure, whether they're getting harassed, and if they have good escape. I know you can have a really good looking spot, and if it's surrounded by open terrain, they will not bed there. They want to be able to run through thick cover when they escape. I've been fooled a lot where I think a spot is a great spot, but hunting it hunting it shows the proof. You get in there and you never see, in 10 years of hunting it 3 times a year, you don't see a decent buck ever in there. But there's other spots that if you leave it alone, you only hunt it once or twice a year. Every time you hunt there, a decent buck comes out. You know, and then it doesn't look like crap. So a lot of times you just got to throw a hunt at something to find out, or a camera in there and find out through the camera. But I've been fooled. I've had spots that you find and you think, it's okay, and you never really want to hunt it. And then one day you know there's a big buck in the area, and you start hunting down the areas, trying to find him. And you're just like, well, that's the only spot I didn't hunt, and you hunt there, and there he is. And you start to realize that, you don't know as much as you think you do. But getting the experience in those spots and seeing what happens, it takes time. I mean, if you only throw 1 or 2 hunts a year at these spots, you don't learn a lot, right? Cameras are a big help. If you go in or you hunt it, you drop a camera, just leave it for the season. But they get stolen a lot too.
I think there's a difference between ground scent and deer scent per se. Like they're obviously going to smell people if the wind's coming from there, and they're used to that happening.
Yeah, but I think, in my opinion, no, I've got no evidence of this, but just based on deer reaction, I think they know where you're at when they smell you. I think it's almost like us seeing somebody out in the distance. You know where they're at. I think they can smell the air current. They know where the person is. You know, you ever have one smell you and it stops? It starts looking around in the tree, like it seems to know where you're at, whether it can see you or not. You know,
That just seems, at least from my scene, really, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
For some of them, not all of them.
Right.
Air scent sometimes it's like, well, maybe not.
I've hunted here and the wind's blowing in like this. There's people walking on the trail. You can see the people.
Exactly, yeah.
And the deer are walking up eating. They'll look over there, go back to eating as they're coming in. But they get my scent, they're gone. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Looking at those rubs over there, like, we always talk about like rub lines and stuff, following them back to the bedding. I guess Is that pretty much the example right there? Like that looks like bedding. Here's a rub line, or is this a cluster of rubs? Or
Yeah. So now, try to find a rub line coming out of here though. I mean, there has been. There's been times when there's a big rub line going right across the trail here, and then it kind of leads people in here. But most of the time, nah. You know, where I find the rub lines, they kind of dead end before the bedding. Like there's a bedding area back up and behind that field that I really like. That there's a rub line that's way out here, like 500-600 yards from it. It dead ends 500 or 600 yards from that bedding. When that rub line is open and it's new rubs, I go hunt that every time I see the buck. But it's not too often you see a rub line going right to the beds, and then when you do, it's usually like a 2-year-old. They're the ones that are just aggressive and rub everything. The mature bucks out here, they don't rub a whole lot. Their rubs are usually specific to the bedding area, to the feeding area, and sometimes even in their bedding areas you don't see a lot of rubs. I bet if we walked around in there, which we can't because it's private past the river, I don't think we'd find rubs, huge rubs. I think you find them here in the staging area. You know, and I don't really see anything too huge right now, you know. But
it depends on the tree type too.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
When I was hunting a lot of river bottoms this year on public in Iowa, it was just flat and it was just willows. And they don't rub any of that. You find some scrapes in there. You wouldn't find any rubs, but there was bucks in there.
Yeah. And vice versa. You can come into an area out here, and if there's a group of poplars, every one of them will be rubbed, and it doesn't matter if it's near bedding or not. Every deer that walks past it, they'll see the trees and go, oh, poplars, and go over there and rub every one of them. And then you'll see tree stands all the way around it, and there ain't bedding for 500 yards, you know. Yeah, we got buckthorn bad here. It's everywhere.
So how are you using the rubs? When you start to find a rub in a new area, is that just...
The thing for me is rubs, all they tell me is that there's a big buck there, right? Unless they're near bedding. So if I think this is a bedding area and there's rubs here, these rubs I'll be excited about. A rub along that trail someplace or out in the forest tells me there's a buck around. That's all it tells me. So you got to think like a mature buck out here probably spends about 5% of its time in daylight on its feet. So 95% of the time that you see sign, it's made at night. And during that 5% he's on his feet during daylight is a paranoid time for him when he doesn't do a lot of rubbing and a lot of leaving sign. Most sign you find is left at night. So the only real sign as in that's glowing to me as good is when I see it coming out of bedding areas, basically. To me, everything revolves around bedding. As soon as you start trying to hunt deer, you know, like on funnels and stuff like that during rut, you stop getting them mature bucks traveling long distances. Even the funnels for bedding have to be close. What I see with mature bucks out here, and I mean when you get past that 3-year-old range, when they're actually mature, how they do rut is they'll set up a bedding area next to the doe bedding area and monitor them coming in and out, and they'll try to keep everything in that tight cover. They don't go running cross country. Every now and then you'll get one that gets the right day or something that will go chasing a doe all over the place, and you'll see it out of your car window or something, but you don't see that on a regular basis with the mature ones. They just got that short window of movement, and what you have to do is, the sign that is critical is the sign you find within that short window of movement.
That's pretty much exactly what I found scouting last spring. There's real 2 woodlots, and then there's like a cattails and tall grass and dogwood and just real thick, nasty, but it was all wet. And then there'd be little pockets of land in the middle of them 2 woodlots with rubs all over them little pockets of land. Well, then I went back and hunted it around pre-rut, and there's like knee-high water walking in. You really had to take your time, and I ended up getting too close, and I ended up kicking out the buck that I had been shining. But I think that's what he was doing now, thinking back on it, because the does bed right on the transition of them 2 woodlots. But he was still secure during the daytime where he could monitor the does, but nobody's gonna get to him, or he's gonna, you know, it was very hard to get to him. And that was just kind of a eye-opener for me going into next year. Now I have a better idea of how I can approach that. And
right. There's some, I mean, we came onto this about 5-6 years ago, maybe a little longer ago than that. I started in backtracking deer I was hunting. I found what I'll call rut bedding, where mature bucks set up on that doe group, and you'll find during rut or right after, the beds look like they're worn a little bit, but they don't look like they're used a lot. And then when you find them at this time of the year, they're hardly, you can tell it was a bed, but not by much. But there's rubs everywhere right in that spot, and you can get there and you see that doe bedding area, and repeatedly, year after year, there'll be a buck there, but it's for that little tight span, like the last week of October. You got like a 1 week period to hunt it. And all this bedding is kind of specific like that. You kind of got to start figuring out when they're there. And that's what I mean by doing like a pattern of hunting them and seeing what's happening. You go in there and look at the sign and stuff, hunt it a day, nothing happens. You know, wait till a different period in the year, hunt it during rut, then hunt it late season. And get a pattern for when the time frame is that the bucks are there. And I've had spots that are, like I got a spot out here that has deer in it all the time, and I'll always have bucks come out of it. But they're never mature until that pre-rut, that last week of October, is when I'll see mature bucks come out of there. And it's adjacent to a doe bedding area. Then they take it over at that time frame, but otherwise they want nothing to do with that spot. But the younger bucks are in there. So you got to get that pattern, and by hunting it or dropping a camera in there or something and figuring out what's going on.
So basically, if you're going out and scouting and you're finding doe bedding areas, is that kind of what you're gonna? Okay, here's to get close to the rut. You're just gonna kind of hit these doe bedding areas and see what, you know, as far as.
Yeah, you might as well just give it a shot and see what happens. And that's how I found a lot of that that buck rut bedding, is watching those doe bedding areas, and you're sitting there and the does come out, and it's the way they come out all the time. And also you just see a buck stand up and go over there, and you're like, what the heck's going on over there? And then you go figure it out later, and you find that bed with the rubs. And after seeing that a few times, it started to click with me.